Introducing myself. My name is Madison Ellis, and I've called the quiet suburbs of Charlotte, North Carolina, my home for almost a decade. I'm 39 years old, a single mother to my beautiful 12-year-old son, Miles, who has a wicked sense of humor and a love for all things science. As I sit here on the back porch, sipping coffee, while the morning sun creeps over my tidy little yard, I can't help but reflect on just how much my life has changed in the past few years. I wasn't always this grounded. There was a time, not too long ago, when I measured my worth by the happiness of my husband, the cleanliness of our home, and the gleam of pride in other people's eyes. I came from a working-class family in Ohio, the oldest of three, always the peacemaker, the responsible one, the girl who shouldered more than her fair share. That habit followed me into adulthood. I met David during the first semester at NC State. He was bold, brilliant, had a laugh that made heads turn, and dreams as loud as the city skyline. I was drawn to his ambition, and he, to my patience. When David and I got married at 25, we had little more than our college degrees and a 10-year-old Toyota. But we shared big dreams. I was finishing a double major in education and English, hoping to teach, while he wanted to conquer the business world. We moved to Charlotte in search of better opportunities and a quieter life. It felt like a partnership. He would work late hours, chasing the next promotion, and I would keep the home fires burning. When I became pregnant with Miles, my priorities immediately shifted. I pressed pause on grad school and set aside my teaching ambitions, pouring my energy into motherhood. It was around that time I learned how to stretch a dollar, how to soothe a colicky baby in the darkness, and how to silence my own longing for career advancement, for the sake of stability and peace at home. For years, I watched David's star rise. New suits, better cars, bigger offices, and I cheered him on from the sidelines, never once questioning if his dreams were more important than mine. My contributions were quiet: laundry sorted and folded, school lunches packed with notes, family finances balanced to the last cent. But nobody beyond our front door really noticed or cared. And if I'm being honest, I stopped noticing too. I want to be clear. I am not bitter about the years I gave. Miles needed me, and I took genuine pride in being the glue that held us together, until the day I realized I was holding a patchwork of secrets and lies. Now, looking back, I see those sacrifices for what they were: evidence of strength, not weakness. My story isn't unique, but telling it has become my way of reclaiming the parts of myself I once gave away for free. So this is me, Madison, survivor, mother, and a woman determined to never be invisible again. The years of sacrifice. Looking back, it feels almost surreal how easily I slipped into the role of caretaker, cheerleader, and silent architect behind Ethan's ascent. When we were first married, we scraped by. I put Ethan's dreams before my own, with the unwavering faith that his success would eventually provide us both a better life. I don't think I ever truly considered what I was giving up at the time. It was just what made sense. We both wanted stability, but the price of that security fell almost entirely on my shoulders. I still remember the wallpapered apartment with the leaky faucet and threadbare carpet, and how I was always the one coaxing our bills into balance at the kitchen table by the dull yellow light. My own student loan statements sat unopened, tucked into a shoebox beneath the bed, pushed aside in the name of someday. As Ethan poured himself into his classes and late-night internships, I worked part-time jobs, waitressing, running errands for the local library, even babysitting in the evenings. While going to bed each night, convinced it was all just a necessary season. I became an expert at stretching every paycheck, transforming ramen and frozen peas into special dinners, learning to do more with less. But exhaustion was a constant companion. When Grace was born, it was as if the world had gently shifted out of focus. Suddenly, there were needs far greater than my own. I traded the hope of eventually finishing my master's for the tangible joy of Grace's first steps and her infectious giggle. Ethan never pressured me to give up my ambitions, but the unspoken expectation was always there. He would go out and conquer the world, and I would create a warm, safe haven for our family. I told myself over and over that this was partnership, not sacrifice. But as the years slipped by, my own dreams started to blur, replaced by PTA meetings, doctor's appointments, and forgotten cups of coffee going cold on the kitchen counter. There were days I felt invisible. Ethan's career took off, and I was proud of his hustle. Promotion after promotion, business trips to Chicago, New York, even Europe. I cheered him on with genuine joy, always the first to offer encouragement, even when the loneliness started to sting more than I'd admit. Sometimes, as I watched him adjust his tie in the morning or answer urgent work calls during dinner, I wondered if he truly saw me standing there, or if I'd become just another piece of sturdy furniture in his well-appointed life. Still, I held everything together. When Grace was sick and Ethan was halfway across the country, I soothed fevers and worried through the night alone. I became a budgeting wizard, stretching every dollar so Grace could take art classes, so we could afford new sneakers when her feet shot up 2 sizes in a month. In those moments, in the solitude of late-night worry and early morning breakfasts, I sometimes caught a glimpse of my old self, resilient, competent, fiercely loving. Yet, the losses were real. I'd traded dreams of my own for the reality of supporting someone else's. For a long time, I never regretted it. If you'd asked me then, I probably would have said I was happy, even as my old ambitions faded into the background, replaced by the steady rhythm of sacrifice. First, glimpses of betrayal. If I had to pinpoint when the ground beneath my feet first began to shift, I'd say it was sometime during the fall, after Michael landed his biggest promotion. He'd been working for a rapidly growing tech startup. Late nights, endless travel, a constant clamor of phone calls echoing through our hallway. And when he was named vice president, I remember the whole house erupting in celebration. Max painted a banner, we baked a chocolate cake, and Michael disappeared into meetings on Zoom barely an hour later. There was pride, of course, but there was something else too, a flicker of detachment in Michael's eyes, as if he were already somewhere I couldn't reach. At first, I wrote it off as stress. His new role demanded more than his old one. Overnight trips to Seattle and New York, networking dinners, long phone calls that spilled past midnight. The times when he was home, he was distracted. I would set a plate of his favorite food in front of him, and he'd eat without tasting it, eyes locked on his phone's screen. He began guarding that screen like a fortress, always face down on the table. Passwords changed every few weeks. If I reached for it, even to check the weather, there was a tension, a quick smile that was just a little too tight. Lots of confidential work stuff, he'd say, and I wanted to believe him. Really, I did, but the changes kept piling up. Michael started working out religiously. New running shoes, stricter diets, trips to the gym even on Sundays. He bought new cologne, clothes a touch too fashionable for someone who supposedly had no time to shop. There were unexplained credit card receipts for late-night Uber rides, trendy restaurants I'd never heard of. flowers delivered to an unfamiliar address. I tried to talk myself out of suspicion. I told myself this was what happened when people advanced in their careers. New circles, new responsibilities, exhaustion that bled into every other part of life. But there was a subtle rewriting of our routine. He began forgetting important dates. My birthday, our anniversary, even Max's school science fair. The excuses were always reasonable: urgent calls, investors in town, last-minute changes to his schedule. But in the quiet spaces in between, I started keeping mental tabs, trying to convince myself it was all in my head. I remember one afternoon, sitting at the kitchen window while the autumn sunlight danced across the countertop, watching Michael pace outside on his phone. His voice was low, animated in a way I hadn't seen in months. He laughed, a loud, genuine laugh that used to be reserved for home. When he came inside, it was as if a mask snapped back into place. He brushed past me with a distracted peck on the cheek, mumbling about an important partnership, and disappearing into his office. There were tiny betrayals, too. Once, I overheard Max asking his father if he would be at his basketball game that Friday. Michael's answer was non-committal. Maybe, buddy. I've got a conference call, but I'll try. He didn't come, and when Max asked me why, I had no answer. That night, I lay awake listening to the sound of Michael typing in the next room, each keystroke a tally in the growing ledger of my loneliness. Everything about our marriage, the rhythm of shared jokes, the quiet companionship of watching TV shows late at night, began to fray. I was alone more often, though never officially abandoned. There was always a justification: work, deadlines, the future. I was, in his words, his rock. But even rocks can crack under enough pressure. The first undeniable pang of betrayal came on an ordinary Tuesday. I had finished grading a pile of essays and was folding laundry in our bedroom when I glanced at Michael's laptop. Usually locked, that day left open. An email popped up. "Looking forward to seeing you again. Harper." Simple, harmless perhaps, but the sender's name was unfamiliar, the tone oddly personal. The email chain was filled with inside jokes, photos from a conference in San Francisco. Michael, arms slung around a woman who smiled at him like I once did. My breath caught in my throat. I closed the laptop quickly, pulse racing, determined not to jump to conclusions. I reasoned with myself. Business trips are just that. Harmless rapport is normal. None of this means anything. But the seed was planted. From that moment, every late-night text, every quick, "just running to the store," every whiff of unfamiliar perfume on his jacket set my nerves humming. I became a detective in my own house, torn between trust and the raw ache of suspicion. The thing about betrayal is that it doesn't announce itself. It builds slowly, destabilizing your reality grain by grain, until you wake up one morning and barely recognize the world around you. Michael became a stranger sleeping beside me, and my own reflection in the mirror grew clouded with self-doubt. Was I imagining things? Was I not enough? Was this the price for all my years of adaptation and sacrifice? I found myself replaying our whole history together, searching for warning signs I'd ignored. Nights I'd chosen to believe excuses, moments I'd rationalized away. I started writing letters to myself, stocking them in a hidden drawer, trying to exorcise the fear gnawing at my gut. I couldn't bring myself to confront him. Not yet. Maybe I was afraid of what I'd learn. Or maybe I wasn't ready to let go of the idea that our family could still be salvaged. All I knew was that, for the first time, my sacrifices tasted bitter. A quiet reminder that the life I'd built could be swept away not by some grand, Disaster, but by 1,000 small, deliberate choices. Some of them mine, most of them his. And with that realization came another. I couldn't stay silent anymore. The story of us was changing, and ready or not, so was I. The bitter truth revealed. The day I truly discovered the truth is burned into my memory as if it happened yesterday, though in reality it was nearly 3 years ago. That cruel, crystalline autumn when the air was sharp and the maples blazed bronze and red. By then, I'd been treading water in suspicion for months, maybe longer if I'm honest with myself. I'd rehearsed conversations in my head, concocted benign explanations, and played the part of the loving, if slightly harried, wife. But the cracks had widened to chasms, and I was almost ready to face the cliff's edge. That particular afternoon, Emma was at a friend's house for a sleepover, and Daniel said he was working late on a major product launch. The house was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that amplifies every restless thought. I tried reading, then cleaning, then reading again, but my mind wandered in anxious circles. When I heard Daniel's phone ping in the hallway, I didn't think. I simply moved, propelled by an impulse that felt both foreign and inevitable. His phone sat unattended on the console, a rare oversight. My hand shook as I picked it up. The screen was flooded with notifications, emails about meetings, a text message from Emma, and, near the top, a string of messages from Tara M. I almost put the phone down. I wish I could say I did, but I opened the thread, and everything changed in an instant. The text was innocuous enough at first glance. Just a photo of a restaurant table, 2 glasses, a caption, "Missing our late-night strategy sessions already." Below, Daniel had responded with a wink emoji. I scrolled. The banter between them was easy, familiar, flirtatious in ways that made my stomach twist. There were jokes about in-jokes I didn't understand, little snippets from recent travels that supposedly had been all business. Embedded in a string of messages was a selfie Daniel had taken with Tara, her head resting comfortably on his shoulder, their faces aglow in candlelight. It was a look I hadn't seen on his face in ages, lit up, unburdened, alive. I felt frozen. I wanted to throw the phone, to erase what I'd seen, to scream in denial. The world shrank to a painful, narrow tunnel. I forced myself to keep reading. My heart pounded so loud, I thought it would split my ribs. The deeper I scrolled, the clearer it became. This wasn't a one-off error in judgment. This was a relationship built on stolen moments, lies by omission, celebrations and secrets I was never supposed to discover. My hands went numb. I sat down on the stairs, unsure if I was angry, devastated, or just relieved to have confirmation. There was a validation in my pain, a sick sense of finally putting a name, a face, a context to the suffering I'd endured for months. My world tilted, but I didn't cry. Not yet. Instead, I began cataloging the memories that now seemed suspect. The urgent calls during family dinners, the business trips that had extended into weekends, the perfume I'd caught a whiff of on his jacket and dismissed as my imagination. Every time I'd doubted myself, every moment I'd forced a smile for Emma's sake, every evening spent convincing myself that our family's struggles were just part of the modern world. All of it came rushing back in ugly, sharp relief. What made it so bitter was the ordinariness of it all. There was no grand declaration of love, no tragic romance, just 2 people, side by side, carving out a corner of the world that had once belonged to me. The betrayal wasn't just about Daniel and Tara. It was about the erosion of trust, the theft of years I'd invested with hope and loyalty, the shattering of my identity as wife, as partner, as respected equal. The hardest part was facing Emma. I watched her sleep that night, her soft breaths, her brow furrowed in a half-dream, and felt something ancient and fierce unfurl inside me. She deserved a mother who refused to be diminished, who would tell the truth even when it hurt. I owed it to her to break the cycle of silence and sacrifice that had defined my life for too long. I didn't confront Daniel the moment he walked in that night. I needed time to plot a course through the storm, to gather my strength and resources. Instead, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, mapping every next step with razor precision. If I'd learned anything as a mother, as a wife, as the keeper of 1,000 invisible burdens, it was this: pain can become purpose. What had once been devotion became determination. The truth was bitter, but it was mine, and I would use it to rewrite the story of my life, no matter who or what tried to stand in my way. Quietly, turning the tables. In the weeks following the awful revelation, I found myself drifting through my days in a strange haze. I moved quietly through the house, performed all the familiar routines, packing Dylan's lunch, folding laundry, watering the geraniums on the porch. Yet nothing felt quite real. My pain was raw and ever-present, but simmering beneath it was something sharper and sturdier: resolve. If heartache had taught me anything, it was this: we are often stronger in our darkest moments than we ever imagined. I realized early on that shouting or blaming wouldn't get me anywhere. Brian had carefully constructed an image of himself as the devoted family man and rising star at his firm. If I wanted to protect Dylan and everything I'd worked so hard to build, I couldn't afford to let anger steer my ship. Instead, I decided I would become the calm in the eye of my own storm. Strategic and deliberate, playing the long game rather than reacting to every fresh wound. My first step was information: details, dates, evidence, proof that would be ironclad when needed. I started small and subtle. While Brian was away at a so-called conference in Dallas, I scrolled back through his emails on our shared desktop, quietly forwarding any suspicious messages to a new password-protected folder I'd created for myself in the cloud. I photographed hotel receipts left in his pockets, took screenshots of messages from Taylor S. that appeared late at night on his phone, and noted withdrawals from our joint account that couldn't be easily explained. Surprisingly, gathering evidence became almost routine. I didn't recognize the person I was becoming: methodical, relentless, shrewd, but necessity is a powerful teacher. I learned to smile when Brian was home. I played the part of understanding wife, all while building my own case, piece by piece. I even bought a small notebook with a floral cover, jotting down every suspicious occurrence, every detail that struck me as odd, and hidden it beneath a pile of old tax returns in the file cabinet that only I touched. At the same time, I sought expert advice. I reached out to Sarah, an old friend from college who had become a successful family lawyer in Raleigh. Under the guise of a coffee catch-up, I confided in her, not about Brian's betrayal at first, but about vague worries over what might happen someday. Over lattes and blueberry scones, she talked me through North Carolina divorce law, giving me a crash course in financial audits, asset protection, and custody proceedings that would have made any paralegal proud. I wrote it all down, every detail, and began to map out next steps. As the weeks passed, my approach became more and more deliberate. I revisited every account: our joint savings, the college fund I'd set up so carefully for Dylan, the mortgage Brian and I both still paid, but that I'd managed alone for half a decade. I paid extra attention to the titles on our household bills, making sure my name was on everything that mattered. and that our assets couldn't be quietly moved behind my back. It wasn't just about what Brian had done. It was about reclaiming the power I'd given away for so many years in the name of love, devotion, partnership. I remembered the evening I sat at the sticky kitchen table, sorting receipts and eating takeout, and felt a spark of pride. For the first time, I was no longer simply reacting to life as it happened to me. I was shaping my future with intention, and for better or worse, on my own terms. After securing my strategy and my evidence, I moved cautiously on the emotional front. I wasn't about to start a war at home. Dylan needed stability more than ever, and I refused to let my heartbreak bleed into his life. That meant biting my tongue through awkward dinners, giving the same goodnight kisses, and keeping some version of the peace, even when my nerves thrummed with fury or grief. Many nights, I stared at my own reflection in the bathroom mirror, whispering reassurance to myself. You're almost there. Just a little longer. What surprised me most was how sanity returned in this stage of secret planning. Instead of feeling victimized, I felt empowered by my own intuition and decisiveness. Each night, after Dylan went to bed, I'd review my cache of emails and take photos of expense reports left out in Brian's briefcase. There was no more doubt, just evidence and the slow, mindful stacking of my own dominoes. To strengthen my position, I opened a separate checking account in my own name at a small local credit union, funneling a small amount of money each week from my freelance tutoring and part-time remote work. Officially, every cent was accounted for. I told Brian it was for some house repairs I wanted to research, or for Dylan's summer science camp fund. He didn't ask questions, eager as he was to play the generous husband, already half distracted by his new double life. I also began gently enlisting support from those who mattered. My sister Charlotte visited more often, and I confided parts of my predicament to her late in the evening after Dylan had gone to bed. She was indignant on my behalf, promising not to let me go through it alone. Together, we brainstormed worst-case scenarios and built up contingency plans. I informed my parents too, though not about the affair, but let them know I might need help soon. Explaining there could be difficult months ahead, I asked Charlotte to be ready to take Dylan for weekends, in case things got ugly fast. Most of all, I practiced patience. Arguably, the hardest part for someone who, like me, always wanted answers and closure yesterday. I resisted the urge to check Brian's phone in front of him, resisted the temptation to throw all the evidence in his face and demand the truth. Instead, I smiled for the family photos and kept my mask on. I remembered what my friend Sarah had said. Timing is everything, especially when truth and freedom are at stake. All the while, I kept my ear to the ground, paying attention to Brian's shifting moods and movements. He was getting bolder, maybe lulled into complacency by my outward calm or convinced of my devotion. He'd mention trips at the last minute, offer casual explanations about why he couldn't make Dylan's baseball game, or why he had to work late with the team. When I pressed, just a little, he'd offer vague reassurances, never quite meeting my eyes. I became an accomplished actress, playing the part of the forgiving wife, careful to never betray the volcano simmering just below the surface. Privately, I rehearsed for confrontation. I wrote letters to myself in my journal, long, searing drafts that imagined every possible scenario, catching him in a lie, confronting him in public, negotiating with lawyers. The more I wrote, the clearer my thoughts became. Words were my armor, a shield against the unpredictability of the storm I knew was coming. It was about more than just Brian and his betrayal now. I had begun to envision a future for Dylan and me that didn't revolve around sacrifice or silence. I wanted him to see a mother who stood up for herself, who could weather devastation and emerge stronger. I wanted to model resilience, grit, and integrity, even if it meant burning bridges I once would have died to preserve. I also started tracking my own needs in the equation. For the first time in a decade, I saw a therapist, someone I could speak to in confidence without judgment or fear. Those sessions were a lifeline, an hour every week where I was simply myself, allowed to rage, weep, or just sit silently, gathering my strength. My counselor taught me breathing exercises for the panic attacks that sometimes hit in the night, and practical steps for protecting my mental health through a high-conflict divorce. As the months passed, my collection of evidence grew, and so did my confidence. Brian's behavior became increasingly careless, which oddly worked in my favor. He left things unfinished. Texts on his watch, business receipts from expensive lunches with clients who certainly weren't on the payroll. And one memorable afternoon, a scarf in his car that I'd never seen before. I logged it all, bit by bit, storing every digital trace and material clue like precious insurance. Meanwhile, I slowly reclaimed control of my own narrative. I joined local women's support groups, both online and in person, hearing stories of heartbreak and rediscovery, and finding comfort in the echoes of my own struggle. I took long walks near the Greenway, headphones in my ears, anger and sorrow pouring off me with every step. And each morning, I woke to Dylan's sleepy hugs, the very reason I kept going, no matter how tough things became. Then came a point where I had planned every angle possible, read every legal tip, anticipated every emotional fallout. The old me, the one who deferred and doubted, who stayed small, was nearly gone. In her place was a woman armed with knowledge, meticulously prepared and quietly honest. I knew confrontation was not just inevitable, but critical, and I wanted it to count. This wasn't about vengeance. It was about dignity, fairness, and safeguarding the life I wanted for my son. So I waited, heart steady and mind sharp, for the right moment. The chess match had begun, and for once, I wasn't the piece. I was the player, the night of reckoning. In every shattered marriage, there is a night when pretense falls away, and the truth, terrible, luminous, rises up to meet you. For me, that night arrived not with a crash of thunder, but with the dry click of my heels against the marble floor of the Weston ballroom, nerves thrumming beneath my carefully composed expression. I'd replayed this scene in my mind for weeks. Now it was real, awash in the golden light of a celebration that was supposed to be about success, family, and pride. Jack's company had thrown a gala in his honor, crowning his latest promotion, inviting every influential face in his growing orbit. There were toasts, laughter, and Lily at my side in a brand new dress, the kind of night that once would have thrilled me, before I learned how brittle happiness can become. Inside, it was a study in contradictions. The high notes of a jazz quartet floating above an undercurrent of forced cheer, waiters gliding between clusters of colleagues, and Jack holding court at the center, all charm and confidence. My stomach twisted at the sight. I wondered how many nights he'd spent in ballrooms just like this one, spinning stories, sharing secrets with someone who wasn't me. But I straightened my shoulders, pressing a hand gently to Lily's back, and made my way into the fray. This time, my arsenal was truth, not hope. I'd spent the previous week assembling my final proof. Every receipt, message, and date lined up into an undeniable pattern. I'd spoken to my lawyer, rehearsed a dozen versions of confrontation, and mapped out all possible escape routes should things grow ugly. Still, nothing could have prepared me for the reality. The hush that falls when a room senses trouble. The tension of secrets perched on the edge of exposure. Jack was halfway through another anecdote, his laughter a little too loud, when he spotted me at the fringe of his admirers. His eyes flickered, surprise, then calculation. He started toward me, expecting perhaps a kiss on the cheek, ready to introduce me as the loyal wife. But I sidestepped his gesture, keeping my posture rigid and my expression unreadable. Instead, I told Lily to find a safe seat with her cousins near the stage, away from the crossfire I sensed coming. Then, in one seamless motion, I reached into my bag and pulled out the stack of proof I'd compiled. Crisp printouts and glossy photos clamped tightly in my hand. I'd chosen not to make a scene for myself, but for everyone who'd been lied to tonight. Colleagues, friends, the business partners who toasted Jack's integrity without knowing the truth of the man behind the mask. We stood on the ballroom's edge, within earshot of his acolytes. Jack's face shifted instantly from pride to alarm. He whispered, "What are you doing?" The practiced veneer cracking. I took a deep breath and, voice steady, began to recount the pattern of disappearances, the mounting evidence, the late-night phone calls, and the unmistakable presence of Harper in every lie. The words were precise, factual, each accusation backed by something irrefutable. As I spoke, Harper herself shrank into the background, caught between hope for anonymity and the impossibility of escape. The conversations around us faltered. Laughter dissolved into a curious hush. I sensed dozens of eyes on us, some sympathetic, others uncomfortable, a few perhaps ticking through the math of their own shaky allegiances. I finished my quiet litany of betrayals with a simple statement. I know, they know, and you can't rewrite the truth anymore. Jack's reaction was a mess of pleading, outrage, and denial. He tried to grab my wrist, whispering urgent apologies, promises to talk later, to fix this. But I pulled away, spine straight, letting his voice collapse into the silence he'd earned. For years, he'd made me complicit in the story of his greatness. That ended now, in front of every witness that mattered. Harper's exit was less dramatic than I expected. She slipped out a side door, as if she might vanish from consequences altogether. Yet her absence was its own confession. The guests, left in the wake of our confrontation, drifted uneasily. Some clustered, whispering, some slipping out to avoid the fallout. A mentor of Jack's crossed the floor to place a firm, compassionate hand on my shoulder. I caught sight of Lily, tears shining in her eyes. But she didn't run. She stood tall, her gaze fixed on me, as if seeing her mother anew. The aftermath was equal parts relief and panic. I had feared shaming myself, feared pity or ridicule. But what I felt most in those minutes was liberation. The icy truth uncoiled inside me and left clean space for something sturdier to grow. I knelt beside Lily, brushing hair from her face, and told her softly that we would be okay. We were leaving, not just the ballroom, but the life we'd tolerated for so long. On the way out, people parted for us, some offering kind words, some avoiding my eyes. There were friends with uncertain faces, acquaintances with silent approval, and a few bold enough to say, "You did the right thing." I knew not everyone would understand. Gossip never shows mercy, but for the first time, that didn't matter. I held Lily's hand tightly as we walked into the night, into the unknown, into something finally honest. The drive home was quiet, but it felt as if I'd stepped into a new world, no longer spinning stories to protect pride or illusion. I watched Lily in the rearview mirror. She was pale, thoughtful, but brave. I told her we'd talk about everything when the time was right, that nothing about her love or my love had changed. In the back of my mind, I cataloged what had yet to be done. Calls to my lawyer, arrangements for the house, sorting the financial knots Jack and I had woven over years. But underneath all the logistics thudded a truth far more profound. I was no longer afraid. That night stretched endlessly, lit by the blue glow of my phone as messages and missed calls from Jack poured in, first pleading, then angry, then desperate. I silenced them. I tucked Lily into bed, watched her helplessly. She clung to a stuffed rabbit, blinking away, big, confused tears. It broke my heart, but I held her close and let her ask questions. "Is Daddy in trouble?" she whispered. "Are we still a family?" I gave her the truest answers I could. No sugarcoating, no easy cliches. Sometimes families change shape, but love does not go away. I promised her what I could deliver: safety, honesty, a fresh start. After she finally slept, I sat alone in the kitchen. The evidence of Jack's deception spread out like the wreckage of a shipwreck. Oddly, I did not weep. There was a sense of peace, hard-earned, trembling, fragile but real. I poured myself a glass of water, stared at the moon through the window, and allowed myself to feel the ache that accompanies letting go of illusions. There were years to mourn, yes, but also years ahead to reclaim. For the first time in longer than I could remember, the horizon looked open instead of suffocating. In the days that followed, the fallout rippled through every corner of our lives. Jack called, texted, tried to barge into the house. His parents phoned, begging for a version of the story that would make it all less embarrassing. Some friends rallied to my side, others vanished, unable or unwilling to confront the reality of what Jack had done. That's when solidarity mattered more than numbers. I reached out to women I'd once known only by nods at school events, finding an unexpected net of support among others who had survived betrayal and found their power. At first, I worried that the confrontation would haunt Lily, that it would color all her memories of our family with bitterness and shame. But she surprised me. She grew stiller, wiser, asking hard questions, but facing them with a courage that humbled me. At dinner, a week later, she said quietly, "I'm proud of you, Mom." It was the truest, most healing thing I'd heard in years. Of course, there was still anger. At Jack, at myself, for not seeing sooner, for having believed so stubbornly that love would outlast deceit. But the anger was no longer eating me alive. It became fuel. I began documenting everything: bank accounts, documents, assets Jack might try to hide. Calls with my lawyer turned from fear to strategy. I attended therapy twice a week, slowly rebuilding my sense of self chapter by chapter. Through all of this, the image of that night did not fade. It replayed in quiet moments. The hush of the ballroom, Lily's grip on my hand, Jack's mask slipping as the world shifted beneath his feet. Sometimes I felt guilt. Had I needed to do it so publicly? Had I shattered not just his life, but my daughter's sense of safety, the social fabric of our neighborhood, even my own private code of keeping pain behind closed doors? I wrestled with those doubts, but always came back to a single certainty: the truth costs less than silence ever did. I learned how quickly people reveal their true loyalties when the facade crumbles. Some co-workers of Jack's reached out, offering me information, kindness, and legal advice. Others, caught between friendship and decency, fell quietly away. I spent evenings going through every joint account, documenting assets, changing passwords, and giving my lawyer everything they could possibly need. I packed away photos, wedding, anniversaries, vacations, each goodbye a little easier than I'd expected. As I faced the maze of legal filings and practical tasks, I clung to the lessons of that fateful night. I learned that bravery is not the absence of fear, but stepping forward anyway. I learned that my worth was not measured by how perfectly I could patch someone else's broken promises. And I learned, most of all, that forgiveness, often misunderstood, can be directed at myself. I practiced letting go of the responsibility for Jack's choices, of resentment, of the need to convince anyone who didn't want to believe. There was no glamorous triumph in those first weeks, only a daily, ordinary stubbornness to put one foot in front of the other. I carved out new rituals for Lily and myself, small islands of normalcy. We made French toast on Sunday mornings, volunteered at the library together, painted our toenails wild neon colors. These acts, humble as they were, became proof that life could go on, differently, sometimes painfully, but with hope never fully extinguished. I kept a journal, sometimes writing late into the night, turning fragments of pain into stepping stones toward a future I was still learning to imagine. The gossip eventually dulled, replaced by other neighborhood dramas. Jack's reputation, once untouchable, suffered, but I no longer cared who felt sorry for whom. My focus narrowed. Lily's laughter, my health, the legal case that would define our next chapter. I found unexpected joy in standing my ground, in defending what I valued, and refusing, finally, to barter my dignity for the comfort of others. One evening, as autumn gave way to winter, Lily asked if we would ever go back to how things were. I looked into her searching eyes and told her gently, "We can't go back, but we can make something new, something honest, just us." She nodded, fierce and fragile all at once. That night, I slept better than I had in years, feeling for the first time the truth that survival does not have to mean just getting through. It can mean creating, reclaiming, outlasting. I realized I was braver than I ever thought possible, not because I'd planned the confrontation so meticulously, but because I'd found the courage to choose myself and my daughter over the stale comfort of lies. From the night of the reckoning forward, everything changed. My sense of self, my relationship with Lily, even the way I greeted the world each morning. And through it all, the memory of that evening, its agony, its relief, remained a relentless, shining touchstone, proof that sometimes the only way to heal is to let the truth burn away everything that is false, and to trust that what's left might just be enough to build a new life upon. Claiming justice and moving forward. Freedom, strangely enough, didn't arrive like a parade marching into my living room, or with a burst of euphoria and champagne toasts. Instead, it seeped in, subtle and halting, on the edges of exhaustion and relief. The weeks that followed the night of reckoning were a whiplash between logistical frenzy, lawyers, paperwork, dividing up a life, and hushed spaces where I tried to listen to my own heartbeat, reacquainting myself with solitude and my daughter's tender resilience. Over and over, I told myself, this isn't just about surviving what was done to me. It's about choosing what comes next and what kind of woman I want to be from here on out. I wasn't naive. Jack was never going to make things easy. Facing the consequences of his betrayal was not in his nature. His version of remorse played out in manipulative phone calls. One day, rage-filled, the next pleading, then swinging to self-pity. There were meetings with his lawyers, tense negotiations about our home, Lily's schedule, bank accounts, even the fate of the battered Subaru in the driveway. At times, he tried to weaponize guilt. Think about how this will look. For Lily, for your family. Do you really want her to grow up resenting both of us? But I had a clear-eyed view of justice now. It didn't just mean getting a favorable settlement or a custody agreement that favored stability for Lily, though I fought for both, fiercely and methodically. It meant reclaiming something deeply personal, my right to walk through the world unapologetic, not shrinking to fit someone else's expectations of me. My lawyer, a sharp, stoic woman named Evelyn, became both my shield and my teacher. She reminded me, in moments of doubt, to hold firm. This is about facts, not feelings, about protecting your child and yourself. We do not barter with your peace. Still, the process felt endless and bruising. There were financial affidavits and depositions, inventories of everything from property and investments to silverware and holiday decorations. Jack attempted to shift blame, suggesting my own emotional distance had forced his hand. When he realized I would not be cowed by these accusations, he returned to begging for reconciliation, sometimes tearful, sometimes full of bravado, as if swagger could undo years of deceit. The hardest days were those where the arguments, even held across conference tables or through mediators, dredged up the sting of past kindnesses, anniversaries spent alone, jokes I'd laughed at just to keep the peace, all the thousand invisible ways I'd swallowed my voice so the world would keep spinning smoothly for everyone else. But each time Jack tried to pull me back into his orbit, I found new anchors among my chosen family. My sister Charlotte, steadfast and wry in a crisis, drove hours to every major meeting, insisting I was not allowed to go through this alone, not when I'd been so alone for so long already. My parents, cautious but unconditionally supportive, started visiting more often, helping with Lily so I could attend appointments or simply catch my breath. I sent long, rambling texts to Sarah, the lawyer friend who'd first plotted my plan of escape, on a napkin, and she responded with exactly the right mix of legal insight and tough love. Don't second-guess yourself. He's counting on your compassion to get his way. In quieter moments, I took stock of my emotional wounds. Betrayal breeds bitterness, almost by default, but I knew I wouldn't, let anger shape Lily's future. I enrolled her in therapy, even before the custody verdict. She deserved a safe space to name her sorrows and ask every hard question, without fear of saying the wrong thing. I sought out support groups myself, surprised by the fierce intelligence and kindness of so many women who, like me, had rebuilt their lives from ashes. We drank coffee and compared heartbreaks, later swapping progress in paying off legal fees or enrolling in night classes, encouraging one another to count small wins, like returning phone calls, making it to a school play, laughing unguardedly, if only for a moment. The day the final decree came was anticlimactic. A few signatures, some dry explanations from the judge, Lily coloring quietly beside me on her tablet. Yet when we left the courthouse, I felt a surge of something like gratitude, sharp and unexpected. I had won primary custody, the house, and fair financial support. But most crucially, I had won the right to shape the next chapter on my own terms. Jack's face was a mask of defeat and anger. I wished, for a brief second, that I could comfort him, or at least explain that this outcome wasn't vengeance, but necessity. But I knew, finally, that I owed him nothing but the barest civility. Freedom wasn't always easy. I learned quickly how much of myself I'd sacrificed to the performance of perfection. Managed routines, concealed worries, the practiced grace of the good wife. Now, I faced a quiet home, and bills I alone was responsible for, the weight both exhilarating and terrifying. There were moments of panic, such as the first time I fixed a leaky faucet or renegotiated the mortgage with sweating palms, thinking I might just tumble into ruin at any turn. But every small victory, each successfully argued utility bill, each bedtime Lily fell asleep, giggling, added mortar to the walls of my new life. The world at large sometimes struggled to catch up with my transformation. Neighbors eyed me with a mix of curiosity and unsolicited advice. Some friends disappeared, no longer sure where they fit in my changed reality. Others appeared with casseroles, wine, or awkward invitations to things I'd once been too busy or compliant to attend. At school, pickup lines and grocery stores, there were whispers. The other woman was blamed. Jack was pitied or shamed. And plenty assumed I'd one day take him back. I stopped caring about other people's narratives and busied myself writing my own. I crafted new rituals to anchor us. Saturday, mornings spent hiking. Sunday afternoons baking disastrous attempts at bread. Quiet evenings with books instead of television. Lily, at first withdrawn, blossomed slowly, her hair wild and unbrushed on good days, her laughter returning in raucous bursts. I listened, really listened, to her stories about school, her anxieties about sleepovers and divorce, her hopes for our girls-only future. We created a pact, just the two of us. No more secrets, no more pretending, only the truth, even when it ached. I also invested in myself, piece by fragile piece. I began teaching literature part-time at the local community college, grateful for the space to use my mind and skills in a setting where my voice was valued for itself. I rediscovered friendships that had stagnated under years of matrimonial obligation, sipping coffee on a friend's porch, saying yes to book clubs and open mic nights, laughing at jokes not filtered for their inoffensiveness. Most nights, I wrote in my journal, sometimes angry, sometimes hopeful, always determined not to let this experience calcify into cynicism. There were lonely nights, to be sure. Echoes of Jack's absence, doubts about whether I was equipped to parent Lily alone, fears about money, or the logistics of someday loving again. Sometimes, ghostly guilt crept in, suggesting I'd failed Lily by not keeping her family whole. In those moments, I repeated what I'd learned in the trenches of litigation and heartbreak. Wholeness isn't about pretending broken pieces don't exist. It's about rebuilding with what remains, honestly, unashamed. Over time, forgiveness arrived. Not for Jack, but for myself. I forgave myself for the years spent contorting to someone else's plans, for the moments I stayed silent or too hopeful, for every misstep in trying to salvage a marriage built on shifting sands. I forgave myself for the anger and the tears, the days when I could barely get out of bed, and for the terrifying freedom of wanting more. Each day, as Lily and I learned to celebrate small pleasures, a new recipe, a sunset, a silly sitcom, I felt the chains slacken and eventually fall away. Justice, I realized, had little to do with Jack's losses or what strangers believed. It was about standing steadfast in my own truth, about raising Lily to value herself, about never again allowing someone else's dreams to eclipse my own. Our life was messier, louder, profoundly less perfect than the fantasy I'd once fought so hard to protect. But it was ours, full of wild hope, earned peace, and one unbreakable promise. We would move forward, together, never diminishing ourselves for anyone again.